Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Wong-Tam. I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for Toronto Centre. And today, leading up to the National Day of Housing, we are facing a critical issue that demands urgent attention, and that is the rising rate of homelessness in Ontario. And today, I've invited over 100 advocates from across the province, largely with the support of those who are on the stage with me today. And our call is to the Doug Ford government to create and fund a plan to end homelessness. I want to acknowledge that on the stage and the podium with me is Mainstay Housing, the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, Sistering. These are just some of the significant partners that will be coming through the House to raise their voice on this issue. Homelessness numbers in Ontario are stark, but behind them are stories about real people, our neighbors, our friends, and families. Ontario is in the throes of a homelessness crisis of staggering proportions that we have not seen before. Recent estimates from the internal government documents indicates that over 234,000 individuals are homeless across this province. This figure represents a very sharp increase from previous years, underscoring the inadequacy of existing measures. Adding to this, we are seeing encampments in every single town and community, over 1,400 of them in Ontario, and it is getting worse. We must recognize that winter is also coming. The gendered impacts of the housing crisis deserve special attention, the attention that it is not getting from this government. For women, homelessness isn't just about a lack of a roof over their heads, it's also about survival in the face of violence. Women experiencing homelessness are disproportionate victims of physical and sexual assault and sexual abuse, and on the streets and in the shelters. Many of them are also fleeing domestic violence, only to face further trauma in unsafe environment. This government had an opportunity to declare intimate partner violence an epidemic, and they still have not. Considering that all the unique challenges faced by single moms who often bear the brunt of the housing crisis while they're also trying to care for their children, Indigenous women who are overrepresented among the homeless population carry the weight of systemic racism and intergenerational trauma. Without targeted solutions, these women are left to navigate a system that is not designed to meet their needs. The Ford government has the tools to address the crisis, but they will not, and they have not. According to a 2019 Auditor General report, Ontario lacks a cohesive provincial plan to prevent and reduce homelessness. This lack of a comprehensive strategy isn't just a gap in governance, it's a moral and legislative failure. Homelessness isn't an inevitability. It's a solvable problem. Yet under this Ford government, housing programs are underfunded, fragmented, and poorly coordinated. Affordable housing projects are delayed or abandoned, and emergency support simply falls short. Without a clear, measurable plan, homelessness continues to rise, leaving the most vulnerable among us without hope or stability. We need leadership, and we need it now. We need that leadership to prioritize affordable housing, supports for survivors of domestic violence, and systematic reforms to address the root causes of homelessness. It starts with a plan to end homelessness, a plan that is funded, and a plan that works. I want to invite to the podium speakers, starting with Corey Roslin, who is representing the Elizabeth Fry Society of Northeastern Ontario. Following Corey's comments, we'll be hearing from Dr. Sue Mi Cheng, who is the Executive Director of Street Haven, and then following that, we'll have a very special speaker for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. My name is Corey Roslin, and I'm here today representing the Elizabeth Fry Society of Northeastern Ontario. I'm here to give voice to women and gender-diverse people from Northern Ontario who are experiencing homelessness, along with those who are working in shelters and other supportive environments for women experiencing homelessness. In our northern communities, our population is smaller, more rural, and spread out. We have overall less resources to support those who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. In Sudbury, there have been no investments in women or gender-specific housing developments. Our northern communities experience harsher weather, both extreme cold in winter and heat in summer. We have less access to supports to address all of the complex needs that form the intersection of issues leading to homelessness, including mental illness, substance use, addictions, experiences of violence and trauma, including intimate partner violence, particularly for women and gender diverse people. The population experiencing homelessness is growing exponentially every single day. Existing resources cannot keep up. Across our province, we're also seeing the criminalization of survival in our communities that are failing to adequately support those who need it most. This has to stop. Solutions to homelessness do not include incarceration, disbursement of tent cities or encampments, the creation or enforcement of bylaws, or the use of the notwithstanding clause to address the visibility of homelessness. What is needed for us is to make any strides in reducing homelessness is both supportive housing and deeply affordable housing. We need collaboration from all levels of government to accomplish this. Our local municipal government is making commitments to housing, putting boots on the ground, supporting local organizations who are doing this work. Our provincial government has not yet responded to match the commitment recently announced by the federal government. I call on the province to make this commitment now. We need our governments to have a willingness to be courageous, to be creative, and to listen to the voices of people that are deep in the weeds of this issue, of this crisis. That is the people working in it, and most importantly, the people experiencing it. We need the Government of Ontario to develop a strategy to end homelessness and fund that strategy, and specifically women's homelessness. We need to action this strategy now. Frontline staff working in our shelters are forced to turn away women who have nowhere to go but be out on the streets of our city, and those women end up in encampments which are not safe places for them to be. Winter is here. Lives are at stake in our community every day. This issue must be prioritized.
Morning. Morning. My name is Sumi Chang, and I'm the Executive Director of Street Haven. The situation has gotten worse for homeless women in Ontario. The provincial government has a responsibility to end homelessness in the province, but more and more women are homeless now than ever before, living in the shelters, on the streets, and in encampments because of the lack of government policies and lack of investments in affordable supportive care housing. As a member of the Ontario's Coalition for Women's Shelter and Supportive Housing, my agency sees firsthand the worsening of the homeless crisis amongst women in Toronto. In the past year, we've turned away 600 women knocking on our door seeking shelter and housing. This number is 6 times more than greater than the number of women we serve on an annual basis. And this is because there's not enough shelter or housing that currently exists in Toronto. We've been helping women for nearly 60 years. In fact, we created Canada's first women's shelter, and we've never seen the homeless crisis reach such disastrous proportions. It's become glaringly obvious that homeless women are getting left behind. There's little or next to no investments in women's affordable supportive care housing across the province. In Toronto, development of new women's housing makes up less than 2% of overall development. Homeless women's housing needs and issues are being ignored, and because of that, there has been an absence of any real plan to end homelessness among women. The homeless women in our shelters and addiction treatment programs are motivated, and they're ready to move into their own supportive care homes, but can't because they cannot afford that. There's no new development of women's affordable supportive care homes right now. Many of our shelter clients have been in our shelters for over a year because of the absence of affordable women-specific housing and the absence of housing supports. Homeless women in our addictions treatment programs are at even greater risk of relapse and even death because of the absence of supportive care homes in Toronto and across the province. There's a real sense of urgency that exists at the dire situation that homeless women face, but the province is really turning a blind eye to this very critical social policy issue. To acknowledge the importance of National Housing Day, we've come to Queen's Park today with over 100 clients, supporters, advocates, agencies, and networks to demand that this government, once and for all, step up and immediately develop a provincial strategy by 2025 to tackle homelessness, and that includes making significant investments in the development of affordable, supportive care housing to deal with the homeless crisis. I'd like to now bring Vivian, our client from Street Haven.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. It's an honor to stand here today and express my gratitude for the incredible work Street Haven does to support women seeking shelter and stability. Homelessness means living in constant instability, moving between shelters, no place to call home, and unable to move forward. When I arrived at Street Haven, I wasn't sure I could adjust. As someone who values a personal space, blending in was hard. But the staff, Samantha, who helped me set and achieve my goals, and activities like movie nights gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging and hope. Street Haven didn't just give me a roof over my head. It gave me the tool and support I needed to rebuild my life and career. While living in the shelter, I started my tech career, attending online classes without worrying about internet access or a safe place to study. But for so many women like me, the journey can't truly begin without affordable housing. That's why we urgently need the government to expand programs like the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefits Co-op, invest, and grant access to affordable rental homes. Without these, women who are homeless remain trapped in a cycle of uncertainty, unable to regain their independence. Every woman deserves access to safe, affordable housing, a place where she can live with dignity and security. Together, we must advocate for these essential changes. Let us stand united, speak out, and ensure that these needs become realities for women across Toronto and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Yeah, very well done. Thank you, Vivian, for your story, for your courage to speak up. Thank you to all our speakers. Obviously, we have not been at this podium. This is not the first time at the podium for none of the speakers. Many have been housing advocates for a number of years. They have been calling on this government for action. This government has not been listening, and we hope that this government will once again look at us and recognize that the face of poverty and homelessness has a human impact. They're looking for solutions. Will this government respond? We would like to open the floor to journalists for questions.
There was a mention of the notwithstanding clause. I was wondering if I could get some of your thoughts on this, on Premier Doug Ford basically inviting mayors to ask him to use the notwithstanding clause, and what do you expect as like people who work in this sector? What do you expect to happen if it is used to pass legislation to allow municipalities to evict these encampments? Like, what would the impact on your communities be from your perspective? Anybody who wants to take it.
Yeah, I'll answer that question first, and I want to make sure that we have every housing provider and advocate to also speak up to the issue. The government's suggestion that mayors write to him asking him to suspend people's human rights is an abdication of his own responsibility to deliver housing. The encampments that we're seeing across Ontario is largely because of government failure. The fact that there is not adequate housing provided is government failure. So the Premier is once again passing the buck, and the suspension of people's human rights and civil liberties through the use of the notwithstanding clause is not going to be sustainable, and it's not going to be a solution in the long run. We know that people who are displaced from encampments, people who are not provided access to housing and supports, are going to be further traumatized, and it'll become even harder to house them in the long run. We have Steve Laurie, who is with the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness. I know that Steve has been an advocate on this issue for a number of years. I want to invite him to speak.
Thank you, Kristen. Well, I think it's important to look at what's happened to the need. The Wellesley Institute did a study almost 10 years ago called Estimating the Need for Supportive Housing. And Greg Sutter, the author, came up with a range, and the range, again, almost 10 years ago, was the minimum was 30,000, and realistically, he said it could be as high as 90,000. So think about it, almost 100,000 people in this province are homeless. And how many new units have we seen developed recently? The supportive housing wait list in Toronto, in 2009, 31 supportive housing providers came together, and we coordinated one wait list, so one number to call, merged all the names on the list. There were 900 names on the list at the time. Now in 2024, 2025, coming upon us, there's 28,700. So we're just, what we're doing is, rather than developing housing, we're growing the wait list. Now, it's not like it's an easy problem to solve. The Wellesley Institute and CMHA and CAMH did a report for Toronto, which took on Toronto's goal of 18,000 supportive housing units. And at the time, we proposed that we should commit to developing 1,800 of them every year. We're not making progress on that. And even with developing 1,800 units a year over a 10-year period, at the end of the 10-year period, you'd still have 27,000 people on the wait list. So we actually need an aggressive approach to developing housing. Now, there are some things that can be scaled. There's the development of the Dunn Avenue project with UHN, which used modular housing, which is much less costly to build. Was executed in about 5 or 6 months. The city gave the land, there was funding available for both services and the purchase of modular housing, and now 55 people are housed. That's a small amount, but it's a big start. And I think if we could scale that across the city, we would certainly reduce human suffering. So again, it's not that we don't know what to do, it's just we're not doing it. The capital requirements are huge, but this is something that many of the supportive housing providers now have their own capital because their mortgages have expired, so they can leverage that capital, and we need a capital development strategy to cover the cost of capital development as well as money allocated to provide the services. But the key piece is the capital.
Thank you.
I just want to sort of add to what Steve said. Of course, housing is the only solution. And with the notwithstanding clause, it is very dangerous to set the precedent that we are going to punish people for system failures. So I think it's really important for us all as advocates, not just in housing and homelessness, but to look at the risks that using the notwithstanding clause to remove people's constitutional rights presents across the board for all Ontarians. And I think I just wanted to speak to that really briefly. Yeah. Savannah Wilson.
Where are you from?
Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness. Thanks.
I just wanted to paint a bit of a picture about the women who are in encampments, at least the ones we see. So since post-pandemic and with the homeless refugee crisis that intersected in the city, we've seen more women knocking on our doors than we've ever seen in our entire organization's history. And these women are shelterless and homeless and living in deep, deep poverty. They come to us with zero resources. When we give them food, because that's all we can offer because we don't have any space right now, they return back on the streets and in encampments. So what this direction is going to do is further marginalize these women who are already marginalized. They've come to a country that's far away from their country of origin. They experience significant violence. They're on the fringes right now. And this direction is only going to further marginalize women. And I feel that the current government's position around homelessness and the dehumanization of individuals who homeless, especially women, is very violent in nature when you think about whether or not it's supportive enough for the kind of needs that these women have. Really, the position should really be about focusing on introducing more housing rather than trying to remove them forcibly from spaces that, ultimately they don't really want to be in, but they really have no choice at this point in time because there's no supports from government.
In Toronto, what we've seen is that as you disperse one encampment and you don't house people and you don't give them a pathway to housing, they will only reappear elsewhere. And so ultimately, this becomes a futile exercise where individuals are constantly harmed and re-traumatized with violence, state violence in this case, and there is no sustainable solution. And it becomes very expensive. Do you have any other questions?
I guess I asked the Premier about where these people are supposed to go when they're evicted. And he said that they'll find places for them to go, that there'll be shelter available. Is that realistic? Like, had the province pulled out all the stops to make sure that these people getting evicted had places to go? Logistically, is that possible in a short amount of time?
The Premier has no strategy to end homelessness. This was flagged by the Auditor General in 2019. We have written to the government on numerous occasions asking him to devise a plan. I think that what's important here to recognize is that anyone who has been observing the housing file for any period of time will recognize the government's own failure in not adequately providing housing. Here's a very current example. The federal government has just announced $250 million to provinces and territories across the country that should they wish to draw upon that money to address encampments in local communities, they may do so by matching those dollars provincially. This government hasn't even taken up the federal government on that offer. So why leave money on the table from the federal government specifically designated and earmarked to address encampments, and instead instruct mayors to ask him to use the notwithstanding clause? Yeah, sure.
I just want to speak to that question too, because I think it's an important one. The answer is no. Logistically, it is not possible to provide indoor spaces for every single resident that is in an encampment right now. In Toronto specifically, we're looking at 97 to 99% capacity, completely full in the shelter on any given night. Over 200 people per night are rejected from opportunities to be in a shelter because there's just no beds. So to answer that question, using the notwithstanding clause or evicting people from encampments, there just is nowhere for them to go. And I think that it's really important to kind of contextualize and frame the conversation around encampment clearings with that understanding that this isn't something that we have a viable alternative to at this moment. We don't have enough housing and we don't have enough shelter beds. So the logistics of it just don't make sense.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Introduce yourself too.
Hi, I'm Valletta Peters. I am the Executive Director of Sisterin. And so thank you for that question. At Sisterin, we provide a 24-hour drop-in for women and gender diverse people. And in terms of the question, the potential to create spaces or shelters or housing opportunities for individuals that would be displaced from the shelter. At Sisterin, as I noted previously, it's a 24/7 drop-in. On any given night, there are 65 women and gender diverse people in our drop-in, of which 50 sit and sleep on chairs on any given night, and 15 are sleeping on mats. For individuals to be displaced from the encampments, we will see them at our door. We're always operating at capacity. I think the solution is not shelter. The solution is affordable housing, long-term, permanent affordable housing.
Excellent. Thank you.
We've seen some of the faith communities step up and provide shelter in churches, and I think that's, again, not going to be the solution to the problem, but I think it would be important to engage faith communities, also where there's vacant land. So some of the churches, and you can see in some of the newer developments now, churches are developing apartment buildings for their congregants and the community, along with new space. So we've got to be creative. The advantage of being able to leverage the land in faith-based communities is that it's already zoned institutional. You won't have a zoning fight. You can just get on with the building. So I think we need a lot of creative solutions. We need to engage all sectors. And I think the reality is that using the notwithstanding clause, it's not a solution. It just will exacerbate the problem.
Okay.
I think we'll probably have time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. This will bring us to the end of our press conference.